Well, shalom. My name is Todd Bennett, and this is the weekly audio recording of the Shema Israel newsletter titled Worshipping in Spirit and in Truth. Well, this was originally published and sent to our mailing list on day 6 of month 5 on the Creator's calendar, otherwise known as July 13th, 2024 on the Roman calendar. And if you haven't subscribed to the newsletter, I recommend that you go to our website. It's free. The website's www.shemayisrael.net, and there's a link at the end of this recording, or you can find it in the notes section. But I recommend that you get on the mailing list because there are times when maybe a video gets edited or a video gets removed. I've had it happen certain times because maybe I said something that YouTube doesn't like, and so they'll just pull the video. And you might get dropped also from as a subscriber on YouTube and not realize it. I've had many people contact me at different times saying that, where's your newsletter? We haven't got it in a couple weeks or a few weeks, and we haven't seen it, and that's because they've been dropped. So it's good if you're subscribed to YouTube and also the mailing list. So either way, if something happens, we're still in communication. Well, last week we continued to look at the subject of worship because it's such a critical issue that's commonly misunderstood. Oftentimes we hear people blend praise and worship as if the subjects are mutually inclusive, and many lump the two together in the realm of corporate singing. The worship songs are the slow, somber, and serious stuff, while praise songs are more upbeat. You can clap your hands to them or something to that effect. Most modern churches even have worship teams whose function is to lead people into worship. Well, these worship teams are more akin to bands that play music and sing songs, and they should probably be called praise teams because praise is more connected to music than worship. And of course, I'm generalizing. I've been through the whole gamut of Christian churches throughout my life. I started out in a very conservative Baptist church where the choir would go and wear their robes, and we sang songs out of hymnals and with a big pipe organ. And really, that was the only musical instrument that I ever saw when I was young in church, was that pipe organ. And then when I went to college, I got into some more more modern churches where they had full-fledged bands and people singing and microphones and amps and mixing boards and all that. So I've seen the whole gamut of these different church services and the way they conduct praise and worship. And so I'm generalizing here, but I'm sure you've seen what I'm talking about. The important thing to realize is that there's no direct connection between worship and music. Worship, as we've seen, is more about a person's act of submission and obedience. And while there's certainly nothing wrong with instruments, music, and singing, I mean, we see it in the temple in Jerusalem. David actually wrote many of the Psalms. We have all sorts of Psalms in the scriptures, and some of them are to be sung to certain tunes that were known at the time with certain instruments. And actually, as you get to the end of the traditional Psalms, and 149, 150, it's talking about different instruments and such. So nothing wrong with instruments at all, but we're just trying to make a distinction here between the concept of praise and the understanding of worship. It's important to understand that they're not, these musical instruments are not at the heart of worship when we look at its original meaning in the Hebrew text. Now, when examining worship over the past couple weeks, we spent a lot of time looking at the event involving Abraham and Isaac when they worshipped Yahweh on a mountain in the land of Moriah through their obedience. The reason is because that's the first time we read about someone specifically worshiping Yahweh. Abraham said, we're going to go over there and worship. And well, that's the first time that most scriptures translate the Hebrew word shcha as worship, and that should be shin het hey. I see I'm missing a hey there, or I'm missing a shin het. So all there is a hey there. I'll go back there and edit that on the article. The first time we read shcha, it's translated as worship in that context. The word is actually found twice in the Torah prior to that event. The first time was when Yahweh appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre. And it says, and Yahweh appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. So we don't see the word worship translated in the English. We see him bowing himself to the earth. Well, this event demonstrates the physical act of worship by Abraham when he bowed before Yahweh and the 2 messengers. When those same 2 messengers later went to Sodom, Lot responded similarly. It says the 2 messengers came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth. So again, we don't see the word worship used in the English. We see a physical act of bowing. So we consistently see from its initial usage in the scriptures that worship involves bowing down by putting your face to the ground. It's an outward physical act that's supposed to represent your honor, your reverence, and submission to the one you're worshiping. You could spend a lot of time contrasting these 2 examples. While Abraham was separated and at the door of his tent, Lot was dwelling among heathens at the gate of the city. He was mixing with the world, and while he showed reverence to the messengers, he did not want to fully follow their directions, which resulted in some catastrophic consequences involving his daughters, if you read through that story involving Lot. While both Abraham and Lot worshipped, their hearts were clearly not the same. Lot was not worshiping in spirit and in truth. Also, it's apparent that Yahweh was missing in Lot's worship. That was intentional as well. Yahweh visited Abraham because he was set apart. Yahweh did not visit Lot because he had mixed himself with the world. Well, last week we focused on the incident involving the Samaritan woman at the well described in John 4. We examined the context of that setting, but the context goes beyond a physical location in the land near Mount Gerizim. It also is important to understand the context within the scriptures. We talked about the fact that Yeshua was headed north on his way from Judea to the Galilee. But more importantly, while in Judea previously, he had just finished schooling one of the elders of Israel named Nicodemus. Here's the encounter as detailed in John 3. It says, now there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Yahudim. This man came to Yeshua by night and said to him, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from Elohim, for no one can do these signs that you do unless Elohim is with him. Yeshua answered him, truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of Elohim. Nicodemus said to him, how can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? Yeshua answered, truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of Elohim. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Do not marvel that I say to you, you must be born again. The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. Nicodemus said to him, how can these things be? Yeshua answered him, are you the teacher of Israel, and yet you do not understand these things? Truly, truly, I say to you, we speak of what we know and bear witness of what we have seen, but you do not receive our testimony. If I have told you earthly things and you do not believe, how how can you believe if I tell you heavenly things? No one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. For Elohim so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. For Elohim did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of Elohim. And this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his work should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in Elohim. Well, did you notice the setting? Nicodemus came to Yeshua in the darkness of night. And that's why Yeshua concluded their encounter by emphasizing that he is light, but evil men love the dark. And the crux of the conversation focused on the fact that a person must be born again in order to see the kingdom of Elohim. That revelation provided by Yeshua is not so profound to those of us born-again Christians raised in Christianity. Again, when I was in that Baptist church, when I was just a little boy, I understood I needed to be born again, and my understanding that I was taught was I had to ask Jesus into my heart. And so it was very common, and I was born in the 60s, and I remember the Jesus movement, which lasted through my youth and into the 70s. I read the Bible called The Way, and I was very familiar with the need to be born again. It was very popularized in the 1970s, although the definition of that process is sometimes vague. Well, Nicodemus, on the other hand, was baffled. He was a leader of the house of Yehuda, circumcised on the 8th day. He knew the Torah. He was all set, right? Well, wrong according to Yeshua. We're all born from the water of the womb. In that sense, we're all the same. But the Yahudim had the truth provided through the Torah of Moses, but they needed to be born of the Spirit. Again, in his confrontation with the woman at the well, he said the Yahudim have the truth and they understand the way to salvation. But here he previously was talking to this leader of the Yahudim who didn't even understand the idea that he had to be born of the Spirit. So while they were a part of the nation, the Yahudim, chosen to carry and present the truth to the nations, they had no special status that gave them a ticket to heaven. So many people talk about, the Jewish people being the chosen people and all that. Well, there's Yeshua's laying it right out here that if you're not born of the Spirit, you're not going to see the kingdom of Elohim. So it doesn't matter how you were born or what status you had at birth, how you came out of your mother's womb. We all came out of the water. Well, this should have not have been a surprise to Nicodemus. Moses spoke of the need to have a circumcised heart, as did many of the prophets. Nevertheless, Yeshua revealed this truth to the leader of the Yahudim who came to him in the dark. And this symbolism really cannot be ignored. Nicodemus represented the condition of the house of Yehuda. While he had the written Torah, which was the truth, he was literally walking in darkness. The Yahudim had added to the commandments to the point where Yeshua condemned them by quoting the prophet Isaiah. He said, "You hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain they do worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men.'" So their worship was vanity. The Yahudim were essentially giving Yahweh lip service, but their hearts were hardened. They appeared clean on the outside, but they were filthy on the inside. And that's why Yeshua said, "For you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside also may be clean." The Pharisees looked very religious on the outside, in the physical realm, but inside they were unclean. Now contrast Nicodemus' conversation with Yeshua to the meeting with the Samaritan woman who represented the house of Israel. She came in the light of day to draw water from a well, and Yeshua was waiting at the well for her. As we already discussed, this was not just any well. This was the well dug by Jacob in the field that he purchased at Shechem. This harkens back to when Jacob met Rachel at high day at a well in a field. As he was standing at a well, Rachel came to draw water for her sheep because she was a shepherdess. And you can read about that encounter in Genesis 29, 1-9. The Samaritan woman at the well acknowledged the shared origins of Jacob and her belief in Yahweh, but the Samaritans were foreigners who adopted the ways of the covenant. They had been taught their ways after they were brought into the land, and that's described in 2 Kings 17, 24-28. They were never fully rooted in the covenant, and they'd strayed from the truth. Their faith was not the same as that taught by Moses and the prophets, and this is similar to what we see in the Christian church. It acknowledges the Old Testament as scriptures, but fails to follow the Torah. In fact, it technically flows out of the pagan roots of Roman solar worship. Of course, I believe that the house of Israel is lost in the Christian church, and that's why I spend a lot of time critiquing Christianity. It's my absolute right because I was a product of the Christian religion. Well, Nicodemus and the Samaritan woman were polar opposites in the spectrum of Yisrael. They represented the extremes of the house of Israel and the house of Yehuda. The house of Israel was an adulterous bride. She'd been scattered among foreigners. She was literally not the people of Elohim, and Yahuwah was not their Elohim. This was exactly as prophesied by Hosea. The house of Yehuda, on the other hand, was establishing a new religion that would later become known as Rabbinic Judaism. They appeared religious on the outside, but Yeshua described them as whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you are also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Both houses had gone astray in different ways. Yeshua taught the Pharisee that he had truth, but he needed the Spirit. Nicodemus was in a religion of darkness, just like we see in Rabbinic Judaism. Yeshua taught the woman that she needed the foundation of truth along with the Spirit. And part of his recorded message to her was, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Yahudim. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. Elohim is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." So, knowing the truth is not enough. You must worship Yahweh according to his truth and in the Spirit. He is Spirit, which is precisely why he forbids any likeness or image, and that's why we're made in his image. As living images of the Creator, we worship him, but our worship must be founded in truth and emanate from our spirits. It's not good enough to just look religious on the outside. So there are true worshipers and there are false worshipers. True worshipers worship in the Spirit, and they worship the right way. Now, I hope it's obvious that those two stories need to be read together as one because they're connected. The set-apart Spirit did not put chapter and verse divisions in the text. That was done by man. These two events were definitely placed next to one another with purpose. The woman in the light in Samaria completes the message that began with the man in the dark in Judea. This was Yeshua fulfilling prophecy as a light to the nations, or the peoples, that we read about in Isaiah. The bride Yisrael failed to be a light to the nations, and that's why she was divided into two houses. The northern tribes, known as the house of Israel, decided to construct two golden calves and worship them. Their adulterous sin was a slap in the face to Yahweh, who had already forgiven Israel for the same sin at Sinai. As a result of that defiant sin, Yahweh removed the house of Israel from the land, and they were replaced by people from the nations. These people became known as the Samaritans. And as I said, the Samaritans developed a hybrid religion that focused exclusively on the Torah with some modifications. They added to the Torah and actually changed the 10 words to include a command to build an altar on Mount Gerizim. And that was the mountain that Yeshua was referring to when he spoke to the woman at the well. Well, Mount Gerizim is a good location because of its history. The Samaritans called it the Mount of Blessing, but it's not the location where Yahweh chose to place his name. And that whole that phrase, to place his name, it's a Hebrew way of describing where you're going to live and where he lived. So where Yahweh decided to place his name was where he, said, that's where you're going to pitch my tent. Indeed, the Samaritans forgot that Mount Gerizim had a sister named Mount Ebal. And the Torah specifically provides for building an altar on Mount Ebal, not Mount Gerizim. And that fact reminds us that it's not just about blessings, there are also curses. And one of them was, "Cursed be anyone who does not confirm the words of this Torah by doing them." The Torah specifically prohibits adding to the word or taking away from it. Well, the house of Yehuda had also been exiled, but they were allowed to return and rebuild. Their return was flawed from the beginning. First of all, only a remnant returned. Most of the Yahudim stayed in Babylon. The building of the house of Yahweh was not a priority, and it was delayed. When finally completed, it was not that nice to look at. It was eventually renovated and completely rebuilt by an Edomite. There's no indication that Yahweh ever moved back into that house. The address was correct, but he was forwarding his mail, so to speak. There was no Ark of the Covenant, which represented his throne. Further, the seat of David ended up being occupied by an Edomite, King Herod. He was an Edomian, an Edomite, and that's highly significant. So by the time Yeshua arrived at the well in Samaria, the status of the covenant people was abysmal. Their condition was represented by 2 mountains that each contained an empty house with divergent religious systems claiming to worship Yahweh. The woman wanted to know which one was correct, and Yeshua said neither. He told her that from that point forward, it would not be a matter of where you physically went to worship, but how you worshipped. You see, people were stuck in the mindset that if you just went to the temple and performed your obligations, then you were all set. And I know Catholics in particular who make that same mistake. They go to Mass and confession and perform the sacraments. They check those boxes. Their physical actions fulfill their religious obligation to God and constitute their worship. Of course, this is the case with the vast amount of adherence to all the religions of the world. If you're a Muslim, you pray 5 times a day and you recite certain prayers. And if you're a Jew, you recite your prayers. And again, every religion seems to have these boxes that they check, and that constitutes their worship. And if they fulfill those obligations, they feel like they've satisfied the requirements and they're all set. Well, I'll never forget hearing a Christian pastor tell his congregation, "If you're not in church on Sunday when those doors are open, then you are in sin." I mean, he was pretty dramatic about it. Well, obviously, the corollary of that statement is that if you are physically present in the church building on Sunday, then you're performing a righteous act, so you're okay. Doesn't matter what you're thinking or doing in your pew as long as you are physically there. Well, Yeshua debunked that sermon and every other form of religious guilt that places the emphasis on outward physical acts alone. So what does it actually mean to worship in spirit and truth? Since Yahweh is spirit, we cannot create an idol and try to represent him in the physical realm. Our worship flows from our spirit and results in our outward expression of reverent submission and obedience. That was always the goal. Like I said, we're not supposed to construct idols of wood and metal that are not alive. He wants representatives that are living and living according to his ways. Moses instructed the Israelites to circumcise, therefore, the foreskin of your heart and be no longer stubborn. He also provided the following promise. And Yahweh your Elohim will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring, your seed, so that you will love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. So again, this was no mystery. Shouldn't have been a mystery to Nicodemus. You must have a circumcised heart in order to truly love Yahweh with all of your being. And that's the Shema and the greatest commandment that Yeshua referred to. Well, this would be done through a new spirit. According to Ezekiel, I will give you a new heart and a new spirit I will put within you. And I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. Well, so it's pretty clear. In Ezekiel, there's a couple other references that we need this heart to be circumcised. So the outer layer is removed so he can implant within our hearts a new spirit. And that's what Yeshua was referring to. So what about truth? Well, everyone reading this message should be familiar with the fact that the Torah is truth. Psalm 119, 160 says, the sum of your word is truth, and every one of your righteous rules endures forever. Well, so much for Yeshua abolishing the Torah. The word endures forever. Indeed, Yeshua is the sum of his word, also described as the fulfillment of his word. He is the word, and as such, he is the eternal embodiment of truth. And that's why he said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So we really must have Yeshua in order to properly worship Elohim. We cannot enter into the presence of Yahweh without Yeshua. We worship in the Spirit and in truth when the truth gets inside of our hearts, when we are born again and filled with the Spirit. When you have a hard heart, you cannot know him and his ways, as we read previously in Psalm 95. The hardness does not allow his word inside. And that's the purpose of circumcising the heart. We need to remove the covering around our hearts, the heart of stone, so that his truth can penetrate inside of us. And John said Yeshua would immerse with the set-apart spirit and with fire. Things were changing. And that's why he came ahead of time, ahead of Yeshua, to kind of set the stage, just like Yeshua had told to the Samaritan woman, that things were changing now. It's not going to be about these physical locations anymore. It was time to take the covenant journey beyond just the physical realm. Moses oversaw the instructions being inscribed on stone. Yeshua was now going to provide the Spirit so that the covenant could be renewed on the inside. And that's why we see this relationship between Shavuot at Mount Sinai and Shavuot at Jerusalem, described in Acts 2. It's the same word, the same Torah, the same instructions. It's just a matter of where it is written. Well, of course, this promise was the essence of the renewed covenant described by Jeremiah. It says, but this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says Yahweh. I will put my Torah in their minds and write it on their hearts, and I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. Again, it's critical to point out that Yeshua revealed himself to be the Messiah to the Samaritan woman, the foreigner. He did not reveal himself specifically as the Messiah to the Yehudi man named Nicodemus, who he had previously met with. While Nicodemus referred to Yeshua as a rabbi or a teacher, the Samaritan woman referred to him as a prophet. This is symbolic of the Spirit, prophet, and truth, teacher, that Yeshua was referring to. Nicodemus had the truth, but he didn't see the Messiah. He didn't have the Spirit. The Samaritan woman did not have the truth, but she recognized the things of the Spirit. There's an interesting example involving a Samaritan leper that's worth mentioning in this discussion about worship. And here's what happened according to the text of Luke. It says, on the way to Jerusalem, he was passing along between Samaria and Galilee, and as he entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers who stood at a distance and lifted up their voices, saying, Yeshua, Master, have mercy on us. When he saw them, he said to them, go and show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were cleansed. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising Elohim with a loud voice. And he fell on his face at Yeshua's feet, giving him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan. Then Yeshua answered, were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to Elohim except this foreigner? And he said to him, rise and go your way, your faith has made you well. Did you notice the 10 unclean lepers? That was symbolic of the house of Israel, who were foreigners at that time, mixed in the nations. And it's significant to note that Yeshua was passing through Samaria, again, on his way to Jerusalem. The 10 all called him Master and asked him for mercy, and in response he told them to go to the priests. And that's because the Torah prescribes a very elaborate ceremony concerning the cleansing of the leper. And you can read about that in Leviticus 14. When 10 cleansed lepers showed up before the priests at the temple, it should have caused quite a stir, especially with one of them being a Samaritan. I would have liked to have read that account. The procedure is thought to have been so elaborate because it was meant to get everybody's attention that the Messiah had arrived. So while Yeshua did not tell the Yahudim directly that he was the Messiah, he provided them with plenty of signs. And calling himself the son of Adam was just another example when he spoke to Nicodemus. If the 10 lepers truly believed the truth of the Torah, then they would have recognized Yeshua as the Messiah and worshipped Elohim. Instead, it was only the Samaritan man who returned and acknowledged what Yeshua had done. And what was his response? He gave thanks and bowed down to the ground at the feet of Yeshua. He worshipped. Again, the emphasis that Yeshua placed on the Samaritans, who he described as foreigners, cannot be ignored. They essentially represented the lost sheep of the house of Israel. They were foreigners living in the land of the lost sheep, who were currently scattered among the foreigners. And this reinforces the fact that all of mankind, not just physical descendants of Jacob, need to learn to worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Yeshua specifically taught that to the foreign woman because of the failure of both houses of Israel. I get so tired of hearing Orthodox rabbis condescendingly tell the lowly Gentiles that only Jews are supposed to obey the Torah. They're teaching exactly the opposite of Yeshua because they don't have the Spirit. They're walking in darkness. They need to heed the words that Yeshua spoke to their predecessor, Nicodemus. Again, for Elohim so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. For Elohim did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of Elohim. Now, those are the words of Yeshua. And he says, and this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people love darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light, and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in Elohim. Again, we all know the verse. Usually it's for God so loved the world, but for Elohim so loved the world, not for Elohim so loved the Jewish people. Yeshua, as the son of Adam, came to restore all of mankind in their original state. Now, we repeatedly focused on the fact that the woman created from Adam was focused on worship. Her name, Hawa, is intimately connected with worship. When she was taken from Adam, I suspect that she received a greater portion of spirit than flesh. She was a worshiper, and her role was to reproduce worshipers from a seed deposited inside of her flesh. This is really, really quite amazing when you think about it, and you think of the special role that she was given. Another potential worshiper, made in the image of Elohim, would grow inside of her and then be birthed as a separate living being. She could do this many times in her life as well, so it wasn't just a one-on-one. This was multiplication. And she was responsible for the multiplication of mankind and the kingdom. And that's why the Nachash deceived her first. Without the woman, the future of mankind was doomed. I grew up with the teaching that the Christian church was the body of Christ, and I later discovered that if you are in covenant with Yahuwah, then you're part of Yisrael, and Yisrael is the bride. Yisrael is supposed to represent the congregation of worshipers that absorbs and reproduces more worshipers. The reason why Israel was delivered from Egypt was so that they could serve Yahuwah, and of course that included worship. The same holds true for those gathered from the nations in the future. They're called to be worshipers, and many of us have been steeped in a self-centered religious paradigm. Jesus saves, God blesses, me, me, me. We've been taught to accept Christ for what we can get, not for what we can give. And this is something we all need to get straight if we want to be true worshipers. If you're in the kingdom, the focus is on the king. Now, we have an amazing king who loves us, cares for us, and provides all our needs. Nevertheless, regardless of what Babylon religion tells us, we are not the center of attention. Babylonian religion ultimately leads to a place where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. We need to go to the place where Yahuwah is at the center, a spiritual place where we surround his throne and worship him. The text of Revelation describes that place as follows. It says, "And between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders I saw a lamb standing, as though it had been slain, with 7 horns and with 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of Elohim, sent out into all the earth. And he went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who was seated on the throne. And when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp and gold bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the elect, the saints, the set-apart ones. And they sang a new song, saying, Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for Elohim from every tribe and language and people and nation. And you have made them a kingdom and priests to our Elohim, and they shall reign on the earth." Well, did you notice that there was no distinction between Jewish believers and Gentile believers? It doesn't matter any longer. That's all just in the physical realm. Yeshua came to ransom people for Yahuwah from every tribe and language and people and nation. Mountains don't matter either. The only thing that matters is if they worship in spirit and in truth. And here's a description of those ransomed worshipers. It says, "After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, Salvation belongs to our Elohim, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb." And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the 4 living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped Elohim, saying, Amen, blessing and glory, kavod, and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our Elohim forever and ever. Amen. Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, Who are these clothed in white robes, and from where have they come? I said to him, Sir, you know. And he said to me, These are the ones coming out of great tribulation or distress. They've washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are set before the throne of Elohim and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. They will hunger no more, neither thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of living water, and Elohim will wipe away every tear from their eyes. The multitude from the nations represents the lost sheep of the house of Israel, gathered from the nations by their shepherd king. And the future scene depicts the fulfillment of the promise of living water that Yeshua made to the Samaritan woman. Those around the throne they're falling down in worship. In fact, another portion of Revelation provides an interesting description of the elders. It says, whenever the living creatures give kabod and honor and thanks to him who is seated on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who is seated on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne, saying, worthy are you, O Yahuwah, to receive glory, kavod, and honor and power, for you have received all things, and by your will they existed and were created. They fall down and they cast their crowns before the throne. Those crowns represent the authority given to them by Yahuwah. They give back what they were given. And that's an incredible picture of worship. True worship is not the concerts and performances that have become popularized in modern churches. It's not about being entertained, feeling good, or enjoying the songs. It's not about reading words from a hymnal or a screen for half an hour at a religious service once a week. True worship is living the truth and walking in the light of truth. It's honoring Yahuwah by living according to his directions and offering yourself completely to him as a living sacrifice. Peter made it very clear when he said, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house, to be a set-apart priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to Elohim through Yeshua Messiah. Worship is why we were created. Worship is why we have been given breath, and worship is why Yahuwah offers to deliver us, save us, and give us a new body, including a new heart and a new spirit. We've been given a second chance, a chance to be born again, thanks to the Son. Only when we're born of the Spirit and walk in truth can we truly worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Barakot, my name is Todd Bennett from ShemaiIsrael.net. Shalom.